Carving a smile. Listen, you know I'm hideous. I want to be that.
Remarks just about Vote Everywhere and why we're here today. So today is National Voter Registration Day, which is a national holiday sponsored by the Secretary of State for most of the states in the United States, because this is a day when no state has a deadline for voter registration. So Vote Everywhere is a program on campus that encourages voter registration and voter education. We are nonpartisan, and we have an office in St. Joe 223, as well as an email, voteeverywhere@udayton.edu. We're here to celebrate democracy and have a great debate, but we're also here because we want to make sure you're registered to vote. So on your way out, when you're swiping your card for Path Credit, anyone wearing this shirt can help you with voter registration. Please register to vote. I know you're here for fun, and I hope we have a good time, but we are also here to make sure you guys are engaging in our democracy. So, without further ado, our moderator for tonight's debate is Governor Taft. He is a former governor of Ohio and currently teaches at the University of Dayton. So, I will let Governor Taft take it away.
Good evening, and I want to just follow up on what Catherine just said and really encourage you to register and to participate and vote in the elections. In Ohio this year we have a lot of local elections like mayors and city councils and school boards that are important for your local community. We also have some very important statewide ballot issues on the ballot in Ohio. In your own state, if you're not from Ohio, I'm sure there are local elections. There may be statewide issues as well going on. So I want to really encourage you to get involved. Now this evening, our debate is an opportunity for all of us to become better informed about some of the major public issues facing our country. Issues like the economy and taxation, healthcare, immigration, and climate change. The ground rules will be after the two teams are introduced, then each side will have 2 minutes to address each of those 4 initial questions, followed by 1 minute of rebuttal. After we go through those 4 initial subject areas, then there will be 4 questions from the audience. You will have a chance to ask your question, hopefully. Again, 2 minutes from each side, and then 1 minute for rebuttal. The final question will be one that has been chosen by all of you by filling out the cards that you just filled out, and whichever issue got the most interest will be the subject of the final question this evening. Now, of course, this is not a presidential debate. This is a debate at the University of Dayton, so the tone will be civilized and respectful. And we've asked the debaters, or speakers, to focus on policy differences and to refrain from personal attacks and to assure that there is time for your questions. I would like to ask you, please, to refrain from applause during the debate or cheering until the end of the program. Although when we announce the teams, when we announce the college R's and college, you can applaud them, but please, after that point, until the end, refrain, if you can possibly do so, from cheering or from shouting out or from applause. So we're going to start by giving each team 30 seconds to introduce themselves. First, welcome the College Democrats. Good job. each team 30 seconds to introduce themselves, and we'll start with the College Democrats.
Okay, well, I'm glad we're here in a fire hazard. But my name is Nate Sikora. I am a junior history major with a minor in economics, and I was the former president of UD Dems last year.
My name is Thomas Pedrotti. I'm the current president of UD Democrats. I'm a sophomore political science major.
College Republicans.
My name is John Gomez. I'm a junior political science and economics major. My partner here is Ryan Harpst. He's a senior business economics major. We're the College Republicans, the 2016 chapter of the year by the Ohio Republican Party.
He introduced me.
You're holding the fire. Okay. All right. So the first question is, and we'll start with the College Republicans. The first question has to do with the economy and taxes, and the question is, what steps should the federal government take to stimulate the growth of the economy? And please include tax policy within your response. You have 2 minutes.
Well, I think we need to start by realizing that the tax code is extremely outdated. The last time it was reformed was 1986. You think about what has changed in the world since 1986. The top of the line technology was a CD player. Governor Taft probably had a lot more hair. Things have changed, folks, and we need to update the tax code. And the biggest thing, in my opinion, is the corporate tax rate. The current corporate tax rate puts us at an extreme disadvantage when compared to our foreign competitors. The top statutory rate for corporate taxes in the United States is on average 10 points higher than all of the developed G20 countries. So we need to bring that down so that we can create higher long-term economic growth, improve U.S. competitiveness on a world stage, increase wages and living standards, increase entrepreneurship and investment, and attract foreign direct investment. Because currently, this is why you see so many jobs going overseas. It's because there's no incentive to stay in the country when these businesses can't keep the money that they make. Another thing that we need to do specifically is allow corporations to expense their income, because right now they're not immediately allowed to expense their income, and that's why you see so many going overseas.
Yeah, and I would add we have 3 core principles that we're looking at when we look at tax reform, especially to stimulate the economy. First is that corporate rate, like Ryan said. Ideally, we have that around 15%, so we'd be actually competitive with the rest of the world. Currently, we have the highest tax rate, corporate tax rate, of any developed nation. The second is Congress needs to be working with the budget. We haven't been working with the budget in years now. We've just been going continuing resolution to continuing resolution. And our third thing is we need to make sure it's paid for by spending cuts and spending reforms to make sure that we don't fall into fiscal shortfalls as the years go by.
Where do I begin? Okay, so I'm just going to go straight into policy. So I would agree with Ryan saying that our tax policy is way out of date. Right, our tax policy was in place before computers and cell phones were in use. So we need to update that. But doing so, but the first thing when I go straight into policy, the first thing we need to do is to eliminate tax havens that corporations and transnational corporations have around the world. Now, I think it's that around 50 to 60 tax havens exist around the world, certain countries and districts that have basically no tax rate, and you can just basically funnel money and leave it there and have it untaxed. And usually the most specific, usually the Cayman Islands or Switzerland, for example. So we need to close those tax havens, make sure that, basically civilization only works when, those who are enjoying the benefits also are prepared to pay their fair share of those costs. And corporations are also in that group. And then secondly, so statistics have it that around $20 trillion exists in these tax havens. I have that from Forbes, Economist, and Reuters that are all not very liberal publications. They have around $20 trillion in money in tax havens. That could be billions of dollars for increased tax revenue for the government that allows us to address the deficit and the debt. That's number one. Number two is to simplify the tax code. The second thing we want to do is to eliminate the loopholes that corporations have in the tax rate. So Ryan was speaking about lowering the tax rate and talks about how we have the highest tax rate in the world, in the industrialized world. That's actually false. So yeah, we have about the standard rate is about 30% to 35%, but the amount of loopholes that we have in the system has it to where we pay about 20%, the corporations pay about 20%, which is actually below the average for other nations. So he's excluding those loopholes. Additionally, we need to have a different system in where we eliminate the corporate welfare as well in terms of the tax revenue that we give. We give about almost $600 billion in certain subsidies over a period of time to corporations. Those need to be eliminated as well. Simplify the tax code. Like, honestly, I actually like that postcard idea. I think was it Paul Ryan put that out about that postcard, is have it and send it back to the IRS. Honestly, I might be open to something like that. Simplify the code to where it's not these I-9 forms that people work on campus who have to fill those out. And then lastly, talk about specific policy. Here's what we can do. What I would want to do in one economic policy is to where it has incentivized keeping jobs in the United States, as well as raising. You didn't hear a thing or a lick about labor or wages. All you heard was corporate tax rate. That's what we can hear all day tonight from that side. So what we can do is build it to where we can have a tax incentive to where if businesses pay their workers higher wages, businesses can get their tax bill deducted. So what that does is it basically artificially allows it so businesses pay their workers more money, and they get a tax deduction. And from doing that, getting more money in their pockets, they'll be able to spur their economic growth.
So I want to respond to that, obviously.
You have 1 minute for rebuttal. And by the way, Catherine up here is holding up the 1 minute left sign, 30-second left sign, so pay attention to Catherine.
So the first thing I want to hit on there is the tax savings part, because yeah, I agree, that's a problem. A lot of our money is leaving this country, but we need to look at the reasons why it is leaving this country. It's leaving this country because collectively in the United States, we spend 8.9 billion hours a year. This is from Forbes, and the IRS even admitted this, on our tax code. So I'm glad you agree we need to simplify our tax code and bring our rates down. If people didn't have a reason to go to a place where there were lower taxes, if we had the lowest taxes, guess what? All that money's staying here. We're spurring investment. We're raising wages. People can keep more of the money they make. Americans today, we pay about almost half our income in income taxes. Why? I worked a minimum wage job, and let me tell you, I worked for a lot less than minimum wage when it came to the taxes.
Time's up, sorry. You got a minute, guys.
Okay. So you talked about, raising wages and decreasing taxes on the working people of this country. So over the past about 5 decades or so, the shift in the burden of the entire, tax revenue for the entire country has shifted away from corporations and put it on the backs of working people. So actually bring up, one of my most favorite Republican presidents was Eisenhower. And guess what his corporate tax rate was in the 50s? It's at 90%. 90%. And these guys are advocating for 15%. Yet in the 1950s, we had some of the best economic growth in American history. And jobs were leaving this country. So I don't know what you're talking about where, we're trying to decrease taxes. So what they're doing is they're trying to work for corporations to decrease taxes, increase profits, so that they can still suppress wages. We're not going to get any increased wages from doing so. So this idea of corporations are being taxed out of craziness is a total lie based on the statistics.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move on to the second question, and I will ask our speakers to keep an eye on the lady up there with the timesheets, so we can keep this thing moving. But the second question involves healthcare. The second question involves healthcare, and we're going to begin with the Democrats. Should the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, be repealed and replaced? Why or why not?
Yes, it should be replaced. And we should also replace Medicare and Medicaid together into a single-payer system. All right, I understand they're going to try and, whammy me on this one, but I'm still going to advocate for it. So when we have in our health industry, we have an idea that we have applied a profit motive to the health of human beings. We've applied a profit motive to the health of human beings. People benefit off of people being sick. Pretty interesting concept. So, the U.S. spends more per capita on healthcare than any industrialized nation in the world. Additionally, out of all of the most industrialized countries in the world, U.S. ranks last in access, equity, and efficiency in all categories. And it's ironic that the most industrialized nations all happen to have a single-payer healthcare system. So how were we able to do that? So they're going to try and say that this is government takeover of healthcare. It's not a government takeover of healthcare. This is basically taking what we have in Medicare and Medicaid and expanding it to have access to every citizen. Now, that won't eliminate private insurance, but it will allow everyone to have the basic health care that they need. And we can debate about what those basic needs might be. We can reference that with Medicare and Medicaid that already exists. What we're trying to do is expand that. And from what I said beforehand about bringing that money from the tax havens, to do so, to pay for this, which is what they're going to ask, how to pay for things, that's one way to do it, bringing those billions of dollars to advocate for that.
So Nate said earlier, talking about tax havens, that there's about $20 trillion out there that should be brought back from tax havens. Okay, let's use that number for now. The Medicare for All plan, which Senator Sanders announced last week, the CBO hasn't put out an official score yet, but early estimates are $32 trillion. That's over 10 times the federal budget as it is now. $32 trillion over 10 years. States on their own have looked into this, because states are laboratories of democracy, so they looked into it. New York's federal state budget is $80 billion a year. They looked into a single-payer system for their state. The single-payer system alone would be $90 to $240 billion a year. Vermont, that would cost an extra $2.5 billion, double their budget. And California, their system would cost $400 billion a year. So even the most liberal states in the country have looked at this and said, we can't afford this. We're not going to raise taxes by another 10–15% on payroll and income. We're not going to do that because we'll get voted out of office, and people clearly don't want that. And Nate said something about putting a profit incentive on people's health. There is no greater incentive for an individual to do good, to make the world more prosperous, to make themselves more prosperous, to make everyone else more prosperous, than profit. That is the goal of the firm. And if you've taken economics, that's the first thing you learn. Profit is the goal of the firm. And profit makes not only the owners of the business wealthier, it makes everyone else wealthier by extension. The world gets richer as we innovate, and profits are the best way to innovate.
Yes, and they act like these government healthcare systems are magical and they work so well. Well, there's actually been a few studies done that Medicaid, it actually has no significant, it doesn't improve health standards at all. So they throw 10 million people into Medicaid and spend $500 billion a year on it, and nobody gets healthier. What you need, and what John said, and this is how economics works, Volt, you need profit incentive, and you need freedom of labor. You are not entitled to the doctor's labor. I can't go to a doctor and make them take care of me if they don't want to. That's freedom of labor, okay? As soon as you bring in a third party, the government, into healthcare, into a commodity, there's waste, fraud, and abuse.
The problem with that is that healthcare isn't about profit. It's not about generating a profit. The idea with healthcare is that it's about keeping people healthy, keeping people alive. And the way to do that to the most amount of people is with a single-payer system. Additionally, you said that taxes will be raised to pay for this. That's true, but people won't be paying out of pocket for their healthcare. It's going to even out.
Yeah, as well, and so you talk about that, that $32 trillion over 10 years. Now, what that's also including is what we're already spending on Medicare and Medicaid currently, and it's also including the expansion. Okay, so it's also, so you can probably cut that down a little bit once you're putting that total. As well, the way you just slandered Medicare and Medicaid is mind-boggling, because if you looked over the trends over the life from 65 and older in the United States, when Medicare was initiated, life expectancies just shot through the roof. Because the people who were able, may not have all the savings in the world when they were old enough, couldn't afford the health care, now they were able to. So you're talking about extending life expectancy and health of our citizens, and you're advocating against that. It's very interesting. As well, you talked about this labor aspect. You talked about we're not entitled to the service of a doctor, right? Medicare and Medicaid already exist. There's no forced doctors to serve you. We're just paying for the services and not the actual labor itself. So don't try and skew that type of perspective.
So I think it's funny how the Democrats here love Medicare and Medicaid. You know who actually hates Medicare and Medicaid? Doctors. Medicare and Medicaid, they hate working through that because they have to work through hundreds of hours of paperwork a week. They don't get paid the full amount ever. The doctors, you don't talk to any doctor, they will tell you working with Medicare and Medicaid is a nightmare. Okay? I think we've all been to the DMV and seen how that works. Just imagine that in charge of your health care. Okay? Personally, I don't want to imagine that. And what I think our friends on the left here don't understand is that free markets in healthcare work. Give you a good example. LASIK eye surgery. Years ago, that was thousands of dollars. Now you can get it done for hundreds of dollars. That's one thing that's actually not covered by insurance. So it's elective. And guess what? When doctors compete against each other, prices come down, and actually quality's gone up. You get a LASIK eye surgery procedure today is a lot better than one 15 years ago. And we see in this industry, prices have gone down and quality has gone up. Now let's apply it to the whole market. Let's apply it to all healthcare.
Yeah, and real quick.
Sorry, we're shutting off. Sorry, we're trying to keep this on schedule so we can get the questions. So we're now going to move on to another topic that's also been in the news, and that's the topic of immigration. And we're going to begin with the Republicans. And the question is, how should immigration policy in the United States be reformed?
Well, listen, my father's an immigrant. He came here from Spain years ago, and I'm obviously very thankful for that. It gave me a great opportunity to grow up in the United States, in a wonderful country. Right now, immigration in the United States is another system which needs to be updated. We have a system that was not designed for the globalized world we live in. People are moving all over the world like never before in human history. It's easier to move all over the world. So the biggest thing we need in this country right now, the biggest immigration reform we can make, is creating a new guest worker program where it's easier for people to get visas to come to this country, which would reduce illegal immigration. And along that line, we need a program, especially to reform the H-1B1 visa program, to make sure that high-quality workers, high-quality immigrants come to this country and fill the jobs that we need filled. Our tech sector is really in dire need of jobs, and there are people from all over the world who can come and fill those jobs. They just need to get the visa. And so we would advocate actually moving toward a points-based immigration system like Canada, New Zealand, and Australia have, which gives, when looking at the application, gives points to certain qualities and aspects, which would ensure that we get these higher quality immigrants coming into our country, higher skilled labor, and fixing all those gaps in our economy.
Right, and we have about 11 to 15 million illegal immigrants in this country today. Look, we're not going to round people up and deport them. That's not what we're for. If you commit a crime and you came here illegally, you just committed 2 crimes, I'm sorry. But we're going to have to take some sort of action, because when we forget about the rule of law and what this country was founded on, we drift. So we need to enforce our laws, and so we're not gonna take everybody and deport them, because that would cause a massive disruption and a lot of violation of civil liberties. But the answer is not to keep just letting everybody in blindly. I think the points-based system would be tremendous for our economy. It would really increase the quality of our workforce. And like John said, it's important to adjust to this the global system of immigration as a whole.
I would agree with them that we should not round up everyone and deport them who's here illegally. I'd also agree that it's important to make it easier for people to come here and work. Currently, it takes on average 10 years for someone to come and rejoin their family if they're a family member, if they live here and their family member is trying to get here. That needs to change. If it's easier to enter the country legally, there will not be as much demand to enter illegally. I would also argue that for the people who are already here undocumented, it's important for them to have a path to citizenship if they are productive members of society. If they do this, that will actually boost the economy. They will have higher paying jobs, and that will mean they will pay more in taxes, which will boost the economy for everyone, making everyone have a better life. Additionally, I would argue against a point-based system, because while that may bring in people who are more educated, those aren't the people who are desperate to come to this country. The people who are desperate to enter this country, who need to survive, are usually lower skilled workers. They don't have education. That's why they need to come here, because they can't succeed in their countries as well. So to only allow people who are already educated and have high-paying jobs to enter the country, that misses the whole point of why people need to come here.
In terms of a path to citizenship, I don't think we should be rewarding people for breaking the law. I think we should give them a path to legal residency. But no, we shouldn't be rewarding them citizenship so they can vote after coming here illegally, encouraging more illegal immigration. People say, oh, well, you know, my uncle came here illegally, and now he can vote, and he's, well, folks, we can't be doing that. I'm for a path to legal residency, not citizenship.
Yeah, I think, you know, there should be a discussion on whether we should have, you know, citizenship or legal status. In my opinion, I think we should more towards have a, you know, one-time effect legal status for those undocumented in the country right now. As well, on top of that, so we keep, you know, the people who are in here, we're not going to deport them. Okay, done there. Secondly, what we'll do is we'll prove in border security. Okay, I understand this idea of flowing people in the mentality where everyone can come whenever they want to. I understand that. So on top of that one-time effective legal status, we can have that border security increased so that that flow stops occurring, even though we have a net negative immigration from Mexico. As well, we talk about, you know, having intelligent and effective people coming to this country. right? What we need to do is we really need to streamline our application process when people get in the United States. We have one of the longest application and vetting processes in the entire world. I mean, what? The people from, if you're a Syrian refugee, you have at least 2 years sitting in a camp, literally just waiting to get in the United States. 2 years, right? So if we actually want to have effective people to get here, we got to give them a chance to get here.
Our final initial question has to do with climate change, and we'll begin with the Democrats. What steps should the federal government take to address climate change?
Well, the first step would be not withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords. President Trump withdrew from that, I imagine because out of fear of being controlled by other countries or thinking it's unfair to the United States. However, that's not a reasonable worry because the Paris Climate Accord is a voluntary agreement. There's no way they can control what we do because there's no way to enforce it. If there's anything we don't want to do, we don't have to do it. But by joining the accord and being a part of it, we show that we're a leader, and that international leader in combating climate change. The United States is in a unique position to combat climate change as one of the most powerful countries in the world, and also as a major producer of CO2 emissions. It is our place to take the leading role in preventing climate change. Additionally, the specific ways to do that would be with more regulations on vehicle emissions and more regulations on factory emissions. I know a lot of people would argue against that and say that would hurt the economy. They wouldn't be able to, the free market wouldn't be able to work its course. I would argue that if we don't do something about climate change immediately, polar ice caps are going to melt, sea levels are going to rise, and the coasts are going to be buried. They're going to be underwater. And I would argue that that's going to be a hell of a lot worse for the economy than any regulation by the government. Not to mention that it would bury people in their houses.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Paris because, I mean, they were just giving you all the Obama talking points to make you think that this is the end-all, be-all. If we didn't get into the Paris Agreement, that the world's going to catch on fire tomorrow. Look, the costs outweigh the benefits by a long shot, and it's not even close. So, look, I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend, at the very least, $100 trillion by the end of the century to lower the global temperature by 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit. And that 0.3 number is from the United Nations climate model that they use. And there was a study from the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum and the Asian Modeling Exercise that the costs, if we were to uphold all of the agreement, which one, it isn't binding in any form. There's no regulations in place to enforce that we adhere to all these cuts and everything. But it would cost us $1 to $2 trillion a year. And the other thing, in terms of the non-binding, how about China not being held to the same standard as us? This just wasn't a fair deal for the United States. China, they emit 30% of all the world's carbon emissions. So why aren't we holding them to the same standard? Why do they get to get off the hook?
And so, for our solutions to climate change, we're Republicans. We don't support big government intervention. Of course not. That's not who we are. So what we support is private sector initiatives. And a great example of one of these private sector initiatives, which is actually coming full into force now, is Bill Gates and his Green Energy Initiative investment fund, which started up back in December. That was $1 billion already invested into making green energy affordable. Of course, we acknowledge that climate change is real, and I want to add on to what he was saying about the Paris Climate Accord. Best case scenario, that 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit, that gets us only 1% of the way to where we need to be to avoid that 3 degree raise, which would cause catastrophic effects.
Look, winter is here. The night is dark and full of terrors, John. And what you just heard here is they're acting like Cersei Lannister and saying it right in their face and saying, whatever, we'll do something about it, not much. All right? We have to do something now. The parts per million that have increased in the atmosphere of carbon dioxide has increased exponentially once we start using fossil fuels. So just to say, we have this incremental change, right? This wishy-washy incremental change will get us nowhere. And as well, sure, the Paris Agreement, sure, whatever, it's a piece of paper, who cares? We need to take bigger steps. I think that's nothing in terms of how to combat this. So we can actually do it here as a country, and again, I think I'll go with Thomas in terms of being a leader of the United States and doing this to be bigger in this Paris Climate Accord actually really addressing this as a threat to our existence.
I cannot stress enough that if the strongest possible action is not taken, people will die.
Good. Good.
What? When are they going to die? So, when are they going to die?
And we have to also have to ask at what cost? As Ryan said, it would cost $1 to $2 trillion a year to stay in the Paris Climate Accords. And guess what? We're not going to get any tangible results for a very, very long time. And at most, the Paris Climate Accords, if they're fully implemented, you want to know how long it would delay global warming and climate change by? About 8 months, at most. So this is obviously not the solution. People are patting themselves on the back about this. That's not the deal that we need as a country. What we need is a focus and energy around investing in green energy and making things affordable. If the prices come down on solar, wind, and hydrogen power, guess what? You're going to see consumers reacting immediately. If they can pay a lot less to ride an electric car around than they do a gas car, guess what? That's going to cut emissions, and it's going to cut back on people's costs, and that's what they're really going to respond to. So this doesn't happen immediately. It's funny that you imagine that if government does it, it'll happen just tomorrow. No, this takes time, and it'll take even more time if the government's in charge.
Those are our 4 initial questions. Now it's your opportunity, you folks out there who have been listening so patiently, to ask the question that is on your mind. We're going to take 4 questions from the audience, and I ask you to raise your hand if you have a question. We're going to start on the left, and you are the first hand up, sir. So please state your question loudly and clearly so everybody can hear. And let's respect our questioner by listening to the question.
All right, so can we legalize weed?
Does someone have a question? Yes, go ahead.
Hi. So recently, after the 2010 census, there was a massive amount of gerrymandering in largely Republican-controlled states. Just for a point of reference, in 2008, there were only 4 states that didn't have any Democratic congressmen in their delegation. Now we're up to 10. So how can we address gerrymandering, and what is your response to this problem?
We start with the Republicans.
So gerrymandering is not something that just Republicans do. It's something that both parties do. Whatever party's in power and they have the power to, they will gerrymander. That's how American politics works today. It's gotten that partisan. To solve gerrymandering is not an easy question. Not even, I don't think I have more than enough time here to talk about that. When it comes to race-based gerrymandering, the Supreme Court ruled that was unconstitutional, and that's a great ruling. That violates the 15th Amendment. It's hard to find, and it's also hard to determine how many of those districts were actually gerrymandered versus Democrats just losing. Because the Obama presidency was great for Republicans just winning. So it's hard to distinguish between the two in those cases. In cases where a district is obviously very badly gerrymandered, that should be illegal. It should be illegal, and it should be reversed to a somewhat more equal balance. Obviously, you're still going to have super Republican districts. Ohio's 4th district is super Republican no matter how you draw it. So it's important to understand that those are realities of the situation here in gerrymandering. And the Supreme Court's actually taking up a case on that, so soon we will have a constitutional ruling on gerrymandering.
So you're right that whatever party's in charge generally tends to gerrymander. That's true. It's not just Republicans, it's not just Democrats. However, largely now, right now, it's Republicans. They're in charge. You also say how much of it is gerrymandering, how much of it is just Democrats losing. It's a fair question. However, I would say that when you look at the maps and you look at how many counties go Republican and compare it to how many people support Republicans, it doesn't quite add up. Additionally, as far as actually doing something about gerrymandering, there's right now a bill being proposed in Ohio. It would make it so there's a bipartisan commission in charge of drawing the districts rather than just having whatever party's in charge. It would include representatives from both parties, state representatives as well as the governor would be on the commission. That way there would be representatives from both parties determining how the lines are drawn, and that will help keep it more fair.
So, pick on one point there. You said a lot of counties are red. Counties are very different from districts. Counties are not determined by partisan things at all. So if there's a lot of red counties, it just means a lot of Republicans are winning, and they're winning those areas.
Yeah, and I do like the idea about an independent commission, like a hybrid independent commission, and also state legislators, the governor. I think, and I think it's like Obama's doing some of this, or he's taking the charge on this. I think it's good because gerrymandering, it's not ideal, and it's hard to pinpoint, like John said, how much of it is one factor, how much of it is another. The other thing that you need to look at is there's this whole idea called the big sort. It's everybody with similar ideologies and similar political views tend to gravitate towards certain spots, like you see this with the left gravitating towards cities, etc. So there are many different things in play, but I'm glad it's an issue being talked about, and I appreciate the question. Those good questions.
Okay, let's have another question then from this side of the room. Like a good question from this side of the room. Don't hold back. You've got some questions. This is your big opportunity. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
What are your thoughts on President Trump's choice to focus on NFL rather than the deficit to Puerto Rico?
We'll start with the Democrats.
So we have to separate here from the Republican Party and conservatives and Republicans from Donald Trump, because he's I don't know what you tell him that, right? But it's obviously disgraceful. You see where his priorities are. You see what he's focusing on. I mean, dude, this dude's so petty, I don't even understand. I mean, he's going after NFL players when you have a humanitarian crisis of U.S. citizens, by the way, Puerto Rico, U.S. citizens, who are devastated by this hurricane. And you have him tweeting about players who are protesting racial injustice, and that just gets under his skin so much. So I don't understand. I don't know. We get to a point where you have to realize that hopefully that this becomes a lesson to where let's not go down this road again, right? We have someone who actually has the right priorities and the right leadership to solve the problems and to run government effectively, because obviously, as we've seen with Owen 3 on healthcare and other things, they can't do.
Well, I think it's easy to frame it as, he's only paying attention to the NFL. He's not paying to Puerto Rico. I mean, he's tweeted a couple times about Puerto Rico. You got to give him a little bit of that.
Why are you talking about
and he's actually going to Puerto Rico like tomorrow, I think. So it's not as if he's.
Please restrain yourself from comments. Or fold it into the next question. Go ahead.
Well, there are many precautions that need to be taken in order to go into a disaster zone. It's not like he can just get off the couch and go fly to Puerto Rico and check it out as soon as it happens. You need to wait for these things to play out.
And I'll add, he was tweeting about it last week as well. The media decides to focus on him talking about the NFL. And when he talked about the NFL, he was at a political rally. He wasn't at in Alabama, where they were talking about getting Luther Strange elected. And that was red meat for his fan base. That wasn't a real big policy situation. The White House and White House officials have said they're preparing a relief bill for Puerto Rico. That is something they talked about yesterday, they talked about today. So there is action being taken on Puerto Rico. The governor of Puerto Rico himself said he loves the response from the federal government and that they're actually helping them. That never before have they gotten such a good response and such an effective response from the federal government on issues like this.
I hate to keep talking about tweets. You mentioned that he did tweet about Puerto Rico. That's true. But he also tweeted a few times about Puerto Rico. He tweeted upwards of 10 times about the NFL when he wasn't tweeting about Puerto Rico. Additionally, yeah, he is making efforts to aid Puerto Rico. However, the media listens to what the president's focused on. They're going to be talking more about Puerto Rico and the aid that they need if the president is more focused on that. And if the people are more galvanized to do something about it, more things are going to be done about it.
Now that we've solved that one, let's move on to another question. Yes, sir. Right. Shout it out.
In recent years, the Republican Party has attempted to move funds from Planned Parenthood to other women's health providers to help perform abortions. Should federal money go to Planned Parenthood? Why or why not?
federal money going to killing innocent unborn children. And that's a fact.
The Hyde Amendment.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to tell you, look, so Planned Parenthood, okay. So that's just a label they put to slander any sort of health care to poor working people who can't afford it. Now, if you look at the statistics, only 3% of everything that Planned Parenthood does revolves abortion. 3%. Additionally, 0 federal dollars go to abortions. So you're just putting, this grandiose statement, okay, you think you're so great, on that opinion, is based off of a lie on Planned Parenthood. All they want to do, they use it as a decoy to just take funding away from people who need it. That's all it is. Right?
Okay, each side got their claps in, so please. Further response here.
I mean, Planned Parenthood started as a eugenics organization in the first place. They've committed 40 million abortions since the beginning of the organization. And, look, it is funded. I don't know what you're saying that it's not federally funded. I don't understand. And 3%, I don't care if it's 3%, I don't care if it's 2%, I don't care if it's 1% of what they do. I don't want any innocent unborn children murdered.
So again, back to the point. Planned Parenthood does so many other things. You're just putting label abortion in front of Planned Parenthood and say slash it. That's all you're doing.
The federal money that goes to Planned Parenthood is not used for abortion. It's already not used for that.
I don't care. I don't want to give any.
You guys done? Okay. We now have an opportunity for one, before we take the question that you all chose through polling, we have one last opportunity for a question from someone in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Do you feel that diversity is an issue, especially within government officials, as you stand there for white men?
Did everyone hear the question? Okay.
You're damn right. You are. It's funny, I came here and I'm like, yes, it's a bunch of 4 white angry men yelling at you. I understand. It's been like that for thousands of years, okay? But in terms of diversity, yes, there is a problem. And it's a very systemic problem that's going back centuries, right? Where you have, either we're talking about race or about gender, right? There's been disparities of people having access to, whether it's voter suppression in regards to race, or whether it's in terms of gender equality, having access and actually this perspective of how you view a leader. If you want to talk about Hillary Clinton, how she was viewed, completely different to other candidates, as she was the first female nominee for president. So I think there's got to be a paradigm shift in the way we view gender and race in this country, as well as we have to end these kind of systemic problems, whether it's voter suppression or other measures that basically suppress it to where we have a bunch of white guys talking. So.
I just want to say, once again, my father's from Spain, so I'm Hispanic. I'm not white. And so I would point out, too, that because of the 14th Amendment, there are no legal barriers to anyone of any race, creed, skin tone, origin. No legal barriers to them getting into politics or anything like that. I don't see any ballot for a candidate that says, oh, you can't run if you're not white or something like that. That's not how this works. You have the 14th Amendment, anyone can run for office.
Yeah, and in terms of diversity in government positions, I think whoever is best suited for the job should get the job. I don't care if they're Asian, black, white, it doesn't matter to me. If it's a black person, great. But when you start to judge people on their race instead of the content of their character and giving them positions, you're giving positions to people who don't deserve them. So I don't think we should bend the knee for anybody. It should be a level playing field, and it is. And as soon as we start looking at it as such, I think we'll be better as a country. And in terms of systematic racism, if you point to me a law that's systematically racist, great, I'll fight it with you. Nobody likes racism.
So first thing, I apologize, John. You're right. You're Hispanic. I apologize. Sorry. Opinions sound a little different, but when you talk about legality, Ryan talked about legality, right? There's not, right, yeah, the 14th Amendment, there's not legal discrimination. However, I've heard those studies to where if you have blank, if you have resumes or sent in with the different names, right, a name that sounds African American versus a name that sounds very white, right, stereotypically, they usually choose, if you have the same skill set, they're going to choose the white person. That's just what the stats show. So that's not a legal problem. That's a society. That's a problem with society. So what we can do as government beats me. It really does. I don't know. Like that's more of a in terms of government and its involvement, kind of cradling society into what direction we want to take it. We gotta see, but that's more of a mental paradigm shift in our society rather than something we can do with government.
Yeah. I read that study too, and I think it's terrible. And like I said, I don't think there's really anything that the government can do. I think it starts in the households, and it starts with families instilling values in their children that this country was founded on, and that can propel them forward in their lives and its respect. And I talked about this last year at the debate. We have a gigantic respect problem in this country, and it's even gotten bigger in a year. It's quite frankly, it's astonishing, and it's not really getting better. But I think it all comes to each one of us. I think we need to have greater respect for our neighbor, whether they're the opposite political party of yours, or it doesn't matter on race, religion, sex, creed, anything. I think we need to respect one another, and I think it starts in the households and families, instilling values in their children.
Now I have one last question from all of your responses. The question is, and the Republicans will go first, what role, if any, should the government play in addressing protests? What role, if any, should the government play in addressing protests?
So the role of the government in the First Amendment is that as long as it's a peaceful protest, there should be no role. The government shouldn't do anything about it. That is the First Amendment. That is free speech. We can disagree, and I think this is where the problems become conflated. We can disagree with the content of the message that they're protesting and what they're saying, but we should never, as a country, legally, or even necessarily person to person, unless there's violence involved, stop another person from protesting. You have the same First Amendment rights as I do. We all have the same right to protest, petition our government, and speak freely and write freely in the press as well.
I would largely agree with that, of course. We all have the right to peaceful protest. The government should do nothing to get in the way of that. Of course, sometimes protests are not always peaceful, though. We saw in Charlottesville the protest, it was not peaceful. A woman died. People were injured. A woman died. And additionally, there was hate speech going on. It was protest, and that's protected. However, the government maybe shouldn't have a role in stopping that, but not to condemn it is unconscionable. They were chanting things like blood and soil, and Jews will not replace us, and other things that I can't repeat here. So for the government to stand in the way of that, they can. They have the right to do that, but to condemn it is necessary.
I wanted to say that there is no hate speech exemption to the First Amendment. All speech is treated equally under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court's ruled this way, and that was a value that our country was founded on. And you're right, we condemn all that speech. Racist people, that nature, white supremacists, they have no place in the Republican Party. They're not conservative, and it's un-American of them to have those views. So the question was, does the government have a role in stopping this? No. This is, going back to one of our previous questions, this is not a role for government to play. This is a role for all of us to play. So if you see something, call it out, debate that person, let them know that they are wrong, that racism is not an American value, and not something that we should stand by and let happen in this country.
Last word.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the way that question was worded, in terms of government doing something on protest, this is where I think we're right on line in agreement. In terms of, you cannot have, that's where, in prison, right, that's where people usually get that confusion, right, we're talking about the NFL where they want them to fire them. right? That's actually within their realm of possibilities being a corporation, not the government, right? Now, when the government gets in the way, it starts to make decisions based off of what people say, that's when it gets to the problem. So I think we're all in agreement in that the government should play no role in terms of, other than protection, if it gets violent, for people for protests.
I don't know about you, but I think that John and Ryan and Tom and Nate have done a wonderful job, so let's give them a big round.
Thank you everyone for coming out. I hope you enjoyed it. So, as you're leaving, Abby will be standing there with the glass bowl. Please vote on who you think won. The last thing, we have one person at the top and 2 people at the bottom. They're wearing the white polos. They will swipe your Taft card. Have a great night.
Thank you.